قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, I welcome all of the honorable listeners back to the series of lectures in which we are shedding light on the history of the Ahle-Hadith Salafi Dawah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent and the efforts of this Dawah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent and its far-reaching efforts all over the world. And in our previous lectures until now, we had shed light on the brief biography of this movement and call, the Ahle-Hadith Salafi Dawah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, how it initiated from the times of the Sahaba to the Tabi'in to the Tابعين, then continued throughout centuries until it reached the great reviver Shah Waliullah Dahlawi rahimahullah, and then how it continued after him by his sons and his grandsons and the people, the scholars who were attached to this call with the tree that he had planted, the roots of which he planted, rahimullah rahmatan wasi'ah. And we then discussed some of the similar movements of calling to the Quran and the Sunnah upon the understanding of the Salaf, unrestrictedly, unconditionally following the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah wherever it goes, wherever it leads a person, without fanatism, extremism to a mazhab from the mazahib, confining, restricting to it, or making taqleed, blind following of an imam from the imams. And we discussed three of these movements: the movement of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and the movement of Shaykh Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, and the movement of Shaykh Islam Muhammad bin Ali al-Shawkani rahimahullah, and the efforts of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent in servicing these movements, in benefiting from them, from the literature of these scholars and those who were attached to these movements in the Arab lands, and then servicing this movement by translating, by publishing this literature in the Arabic language from the foremost books that have been published of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahhab and Imam al-Shawkani. Then they have been published by the Ahle-Hadith scholars in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and translating books, writing detailed biographies, defending these calls, defending these scholars and their methodologies, all of which the Ahle-Hadith Salafi scholars have presented in the Indo-Pak subcontinent from the earliest of times until our times. Now we will move to another point of discussion which now corresponds to this time period of Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, or a little before it and after it, in which a major change in the political landscape occurred in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And this was the rise to power of the British Raj. The British Raj, the colonial rule of the British Empire in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And the British rule then started in the year 1600. It started in the year 1600 with the establishment of the East India Trading Company by the British Empire in UK. They established the East India Trading Company, which was formed, as we said, in 1600. And it was formed initially to trade in the Indian Ocean, with East Asia and other regions to East Indies from South and Southeast Asia. And this company, over time, it gained control of large parts of South Asia and colonized parts of Southeast Asia. And at its peak, the East India Trading Company, that it was the largest corporation in the world. It was the largest corporation in the world by several measures, and it had its own armed forces. It had its own army and its armed forces that at its peak and height reached more than 250,000 soldiers, more than 250,000 soldiers. That was twice the size of the British Army itself. And this company, the East India Trading Company, it came to account for half of the world's trade, half of the trade that occurred in the entire world during the mid 1700s and the early 1800s, particularly in the basic commodities that people use daily, such as cotton and silk and sugar and salt and spices and tea and other than it. And this company, it initiated the beginnings of the British Empire, the colonial rule of the British Empire in South Asia, in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and this occurred in the year 1857. And this is what we will discuss in this lecture, inshallah. This major event in history that occurred in the Indo-Pak subcontinent and the efforts of the Ahle-Hadith in this great event. And this event, as we said, it gradually reached this point when the British Empire in the UK, they established this company, the East India Trading Company, that started to spread in the Indo-Pak subcontinent and started to increase its power and control and interference in the rulership in Indo-Pak subcontinent. And the Mughal dynasty, the last dynasty of the Muslims in the capital city of Delhi in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, it started to decrease in power. And in comparison, the British East India Trading Company started to rise in power and started to take lands and regions away from the rule of the Mughals, the Mughal dynasty. And as we mentioned in several classes before, that the Mughal dynasty, they got involved in various matters, straying away from the teachings of Islam, the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, that hastened their downfall. That many of the rulers, they were rulers who lived a lavish lifestyle, who all they cared about was themselves and their lives and their wealth and their possessions, and they had married Hindu women and had adopted Hindu practices and other than it, and all types of evil and deviance and misguidance that hastened the downfall of this Mughal Empire, to the point that Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, who started to witness the decrease in power of the Mughal dynasty and the increase in power of the East India Trading Company, he requested from the ruler, from one of the mighty powerful Muslim rulers in those times, and he is well known as Ahmad Shah Durrani or Ahmad Shah Abdali, and he was the ruler of and the founder of the Durrani Empire. The Durrani Empire that extended in its height from Ammu Darya in the east, which is the well-known river of Jayhun, the western border of Uzbekistan in Khorasan, until Punjab and Sindh in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, until Punjab and Sindh and further into Afghanistan in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And he is regarded as being the founder of modern Afghanistan. Ahmad Shah Abdali or Ahmad Shah Durrani, he is counted as being the founder of modern Afghanistan. So Shah Waliullah Dehlavi requested from Ahmad Shah Abdali that he interfere with his power and might that Allah Ta'ala had blessed him with in saving the Muslim dynasty and the Muslim rule in Delhi and around in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, but he could be of no benefit and use, and the sun of the might and power of the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent started to quickly descend in face of the rise of the East India Trading Company. And from the great efforts of the Ahle-Hadith against this gradual colonization of the Indo-Pak subcontinent are the efforts of the Shahidain, Tahrik al-Shahidain, the movement of the two Shaheeds, Sayyid Ahmad bin Irfan Rai Barelvi and Shah Ismail Shahid rahimahumullah. And they laid the foundation for that which will occur in the Indo-Pak subcontinent after them, from fighting and struggling for the freedom of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, from the colonial rule of the British Empire. And Sayyid Ahmad Shahid rahimahullah and his close companions and students and colleagues, then they have presented they are part of a large and great important part of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, the history of the Indo-Pak subcontinent. They are the first Islamic movement after the era of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in, the era of the Salaf al-Salih, the rightly guided predecessors in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, that called people back to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah and eradicated shirk, those acts that were major association with Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala in His worship, and eradicated bid'at and all types of innovations and misguidance, and eradicated all types of evil and misguidance that had entered the Muslims due to them living and mixing with the Hindus for centuries, and them taking actions and part of the Hindus as their daily rituals and acts of worship and acts that they perform in their gatherings. And Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed rahimahullah, then he did not just lead this movement, the Tahrik al-Shahidain, the movement of the two Shaheeds, or Jamaat al-Mujahideen, this movement of freedom fighters, just as a political movement, rather his viewpoint was much wider and larger, and he wanted to return back the Muslims to the pristine religion of Islam upon its true sources, the Quran and the Sunnah, and to remove the Muslims from their heedlessness and in that which they had fallen out of after centuries of darkness in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And he and his movement also could not be saved from being accused by being Wahhabis. Being Wahhabis, this label that was used as a label for the traders by the British Raj before. They directly ruled the Indo-Pak subcontinent by way of the East India Trading Company, and those people who were attached to the British Raj for worldly motives from the Muslims and other than them, from the great efforts of Sayyid Ahmad bin Irfan Rai Barelwi in the Indo-Pak subcontinent is that, as we mentioned and alluded, that due to living with the Hindus for centuries, then that which the Muslims had adopted in acts of worship and matters of creed from the Hindus, and in their actions and in their daily rituals, then they, Ahmad bin Irfan Ahmad Shaheed rahimahullah and his companions, they worked tirelessly day and night to eradicate these matters and to refute these matters and to correct these matters. So the Muslims, before the Tahrik of the Shahidain, the movement of the two Shaheeds, then they had become those people who were drowned in shirk, in worshipping other than Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, by worshipping the dead and the graves and directing acts of worship to them, to the dead and the people in the dead, slaughtering for them, swearing by them, making dua, calling upon them, besieging upon them, seeking their help, making tawaf around the graves and other than them. And they had started to indulge in drinking alcohol, intoxicants, and committing zina, fornication, and eating usury, riba, and dealing with gambling and other matters. And they had taken all of the Hindu rituals as part of their lives. So the woman from the Muslim who would pass away, they would not marry her off again. They would not marry her off a second time, following the Hindus in this practice, in which a woman, if her husband passes away, then she remains as a widow for her entire life. Rather, from the Hindus, from the extremists of them, then they are those who even burned this woman to death, burned their woman to death, that deeming her life to be worthless without the husband, her husband that passed away. And the Muslims, sadly, they had taken this practice, that in which they would not marry the woman whose husband had passed away for a second time. So Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed rahimahullah and his companions, they revived this practice and this legislation of Islam, this legislation of mercy, of marrying off the woman again for a second time after she had completed her waiting and mourning period over her first husband. and they eradicated these evils from the Muslims that are preceded of consuming usury, drinking alcohol, committing fornication, dealing with gambling, and other than it. From these matters that Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed, he laid the foundation for in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, revived it, is performing Hajj, performing the pilgrimage of Hajj during the time, until the time of Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed. Then some of the scholars of evil and scholars of worldly motivations, they had ruled and given a fatwa, ruling that Hajj is not obligatory. Hajj is not obligatory due to the difficulties that are faced during a travel for Hajj in those times, and Hajj became restricted to just those scholars who were upon the truth, upon the Quran and the Sunnah, or a special group from amongst the Muslims, a special group from amongst the Muslims. So Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed, rahimahullah, he revived this pillar of Islam, this fifth pillar of Islam, of performing the obligation of Hajj, that from the first matter that he made the announcement for when he started his call of reformation was to perform the Hajj, and a large group of people from men and women and children, they undertook this journey of Hajj with him. And this journey, this great blessed journey of Hajj, it lasted for almost 3 years. 3 years. It started on the 1st of Shawwal in the year 236 after the Hijrah. 236 after the Hijrah. He started from his city of Rai Bareilly in Uttar Pradesh, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, in north-east India, and almost 400 men and women and children were part of this initial journey from Rai Bareilly, and they passed through all of the major towns and cities in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed and his companions in this journey of Hajj, they did not enter any city, any town, except they rectified and revived the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they called the Muslims back to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and eradicated shirk and bid'ah and all types of evils and misguidance and practices of the Hindus from the Muslims in these cities and in these towns. And people, every city and town they entered, they became attached to this movement, and they continued in this journey of Hajj along with Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed. They continued along in this journey of Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed, to the point that this great group of Hajj in the leadership of Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed, they made Hajj in the year 237 after the Hijrah, the next year, and then they traveled to Medina, and they remained in Medina for 3 months, and then they returned back to Mecca, where they stayed again for almost 7 to 8 months. And there in the Hijaz, in Mecca and Medina, they met with the major scholars of Islam who had come for Hajj in those times to Mecca and Medina, and news of this great movement of reformation, this revival movement, spread by the scholars to all over the Muslim lands, that this great movement that is just starting and that is just laying its foundations in the Indo-Pak subcontinent of calling to Tawheed and the Sunnah, then this news spread far and wide by way of these scholars who went and returned back to their lands after performing Hajj. And in the year Dhul Qa'dah, in the year 1238 after the Hijrah, then this great blessed group, then it started its travel back from Mecca to the Indo-Pak subcontinent, where it reached on the 19th day of Shaban, in the year 1239 after the Hijrah, almost completing or almost completing 3 years. And as we said, he did not pass this great group of people, Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed and his companions and his students. They did not pass any city, any town, any region from which they traveled and returned back, except they revived the religion of Islam upon the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah in these regions, and they eradicated that from misguidance and deviance and innovation that are spread amongst the Muslims in these lands. After he returned from Hajj, then he started his applied efforts against oppression in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, against oppression in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. So in the region of Punjab, which is split today between the province of Punjab and the state of Punjab in the between India and Pakistan, then the Sikh, they had their rule and their might and power in this region, and they had been oppressing the Muslims, and they had been unjustly killing the Muslims and taking their women and turning masajid into places where they would tie their cattle and animals. So Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed rahimahullah and his companions, they started their jihad and their fight against this oppression, and alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala granted them several victories in their efforts against this oppression by the Sikhs in Punjab against the Muslims, and they liberated several masajid from their rule. And these masajid, after they had been turned to places where cattle were tied, then again the adhan and the iqama and the salah, the call to tawheed, it started to ring again in these masajid. So Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and his companions, wherever they reached victory in their struggle and their fight, then they did not just establish the rule of Islam, rather their main focus was to spread the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah in these lands, spread the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and to revive and to rectify the affairs of the Muslims in these regions that had come under their rule. And Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed rahimahullah and his companions, then on the 6th day of May in 1831, he and his closest companions, then they were martyred in the city of Balakot, which is border area in Pakistan. They were martyred, and with his martyrdom, then this movement of rectification and revival, then it did not stop. Rather, from his foremost companions and students from the Ahle-Hadith, they are the ones who carried this mission forward, this movement forward for at least a century, and they presented various, countless sacrifices in this movement of calling the Muslims back to the Quran and the Sunnah, to the call of Tawheed and the Sunnah, and they bore all oppressions by the British Empire, in these century and after the death of and the martyrdom of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, who laid the foundation of this movement of Tawheed and the Sunnah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, as will come. Then the next illuminary we'll mention, who was a major pillar of this movement, Tahriq al-Shaheedain, the movement of the two Shaheeds, this reformative, revivalist movement, the first Islamic movement in the Indo-Pak subcontinent after the time of the Salaf, that revived the religion on a political level and with might and force, and challenged the forces of evil and oppression in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and that laid the foundation of struggle for the freedom of the Indo-Pak subcontinent against the British Empire and the colonial rule of the British, is Shah Ismail Shaheed rahimahullah, who is the grandson of Mujaddid Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, the son of Shah Abdul Ghani Dahlawi. He was from the closest companion and closest companion of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, and he was in reality the head of religious affairs in this movement of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed. To him returned all religious matters and matters of knowledge. He was the head of matters of knowledge and religious affairs in this movement. And Shah Ismail Shaheed rahimahullah, then by way of his pen and by way of his speech, by way of the pen and by way of his tongue, he called openly to acting with the Quran and the Sunnah, going with the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah wherever it leads a person, without having fanatism, extremism, fighting fanatism, extremism to the madhahib, fighting taqleed, blind following of an imam from the imams. He fought against shirk with his tongue, with his pen. He fought against bid'ah with his pen and his tongue, and not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, not millions, rather millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, they were guided and returned back to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah and the call of Tawheed and the Sunnah by way of his efforts, by way of his efforts. And he wrote, feeling the need of, during his time, his great book, his revolutionary book, Taqwiyatul Iman, that he wrote in the Urdu language, the language of the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, which eradicated the foundations of shirk and bid'ah that has spread amongst the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. This is the most revolutionary book that has been authored and that has been written in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, that has been continuously is being published for the last 200 years, for the last 2 centuries plus, that millions and millions of copies of this book have been published, and it has reached almost every household in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. It has been the cause of rectification for hundreds and millions of Muslims throughout these centuries, And Shah Ismail Shaheed, rahimahullah, then he left behind his foremost students. He carried out this movement of the Shaheedain, this revivalist, reformative movement of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and his movement after him. So from his foremost students, whose detailed mention is coming, is the great scholar Wilayat Ali Sadiq Puri, and his younger brother Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri. From his students is the great scholar Aulad Hassan Qannauji, the father of Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, the father of Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, and Khurram Ali Phulwari, and other than them who continued this call and this movement after Shah Ismail Shaheed, fighting against shirk and bid'ah and fanatism, extremism to the madhahib and taqleed, blind following, for decades and centuries after him. And Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, along with his companion Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, then they were martyred fighting against the Sikh and the support that they had by the East India Trading Company, the British, in the Battle of Balakot on the 6th day of May, as we mentioned, in the year 1831. He was also martyred along with Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and the foremost scholars of this movement. Then comes the one who took this movement by his hands after the death of the Shaheedain, Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and Shah Ismail Shaheed, the foremost student of Shah Ismail Shaheed, from the major scholars of the Ahle-Hadith, the great Mujaddid, the great reviver and revolutionary reformist, Wilayat Ali Sadiq Puri, and he is from Sadiqpur. His inscription is Sadiqpur, which is an area in Patna, the capital of the state of Bihar in eastern India today. And he is from those luminaries upon whose shoulders fell the responsibility of this great reformative movement, this revolutionary movement, after the death and martyrdom of the Shaheedain. And he's from the major scholars of the Ahle-Hadith. He was studying in Lucknow, the capital of Uttar Pradesh in India, when he met Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed. During his travels for Hajj, during this reformative travel for Hajj, and just from his first meeting, he became greatly influenced and attached to him and his movement, of Tawheed and the Sunnah. And he became part of this movement along with him, in which they traveled through all major cities and towns in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, going for Hajj, reforming and reviving the religion in all of these areas, not just Allama Vilayat Ali Sadiq Puri, rather his entire family from his brothers, from his nephews, and other than them, and they are the ones who carried this call forward for almost a century after the martyrdom of the Shaheedain, Sheikh Masood Alam Nadwi, in his great book Hindustan Ki Pehli Islami Tehreek, the first Islamic movement of the Indo-Pak subcontinent after the time of the Salaf, he says, फाजिया बालाकोट के बाद तमाम मुल्क पर उदासी छाई हुई थी, जमात तत्तर बत्तर हो गई, ऊंचे ऊंचों के कदम लखड़ाए थे, जहां जिहाद का सारा काम ख़त्म हुआ था कि अजीमाबाद पटना महल्ला सादिकपुर के एक फ़र्द ने ये गिरता हुआ अलम अपने हाथों से थाम लिया और ज़िंदगी भर अपने सीनों से लगाए रखा, और फिर इस फ़र्द कामिल के बाद इसके भाइयों, भतीजों, अजीज़ों ने जिस तरह अपने खून से इस नखले ख़ज़ान दीदा की आबियारी की, वो इस्लामी हिंद की पूरी तारीख़ में अपनी आप मिसाल है. That he says after the extremely distressing event of the martyrdom of the Shaheedain in the Battle of Balakot, the Muslims in the entire Indo-Pak subcontinent, they had become extremely distressed and extremely worried. So, and this work of this entire movement, this revolutionary, revivalist, reformist movement, then it was feared that it would end. It was feared that it would end by the martyrdom of the Shaheedain, until a person from Azimabad, which is Patna, its name is Patna today, the capital of Bihar, from an area in Azimabad, Sadiqpur, who took this responsibility upon his shoulders, and not just him, rather his brothers and his nephews and his close relatives, the Sadiqpuri family. After him, they continued this mission and they sacrificed everything in this regard in reforming and reviving the religion of the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent based on the foundations of this movement of the Shaheedain. And he is, as we mentioned, Vilayat Ali Sadiq Puri and his family members as will come. And Allama Vilayat Ali Sadiq Puri, then he was the one who was responsible for the political matters in this movement. That he was the political leader after the Shaheedain in this movement, who took the responsibility of jihad, of fighting against oppression, against the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent and the colonial rule of the British Empire, or that which preceded it, by the East India Trading Company in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And his brother, Allama Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri, then he was responsible for the knowledge affairs, and teaching with knowledge the Muslims in his movement, And by way of their efforts, then Hyderabad, Deccan in central southern India, one of the major cities of the Muslims in India, then it got lightened by the call of Tawheed and Sunnah and the Dawah and the call of the Ahle-Hadith. The Ahle-Hadith, Dawah and call in Hyderabad and surrounding areas. Then it reached by way of efforts of Allama Vilayat Ali and Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri. And their main center for their efforts was Bengal, that is split today between India, West Bengal and Bangladesh, the country of Bangladesh. So several of the cities in Bengal, then they were the foremost centers for the movement of Allama Vilayat Ali and Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri. Rather, until today, Bengal, then it contains the most number of Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. West Bengal, that there are towns and cities where thousands of people live, and they're all Ahle-Hadith for generations, for almost 2 generations, generation after generation, they're all Ahlul Hadith. There's no presence of anyone other than the Ahlul Hadith. And this is by the efforts of Allama Wilayat Ali and Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri. Wilayat Ali and Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri. From the major centers that were centers for their call was Rajshahi, which is a major city today that falls in Bangladesh, and this was a special and major center of this call of Allama Wilayat Ali Sadiq Puri. And the British, then they had arrested and they had expelled Allama Wilayat Ali Sadiq Puri from Rajshahi twice out of fear of his efforts and his power and his strength in Rajshahi. And from these statements that show the presence of the Ahle-Hadith by the efforts of these two Sadiq Puri brothers in Bengal is that Shaykh al-Islam Sanallah Amritsari, rahimahullah, from the foremost students of Shaykh al-Kul Mujaddid Sayyid Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, he traveled in the year 1913 to Bengal, and he wrote a report regarding this travel in the year 1913 that he published in his weekly magazine Ahle-Hadith Amritsar, the weekly magazine Ahle-Hadith Amritsar, which was the foremost and the fundamental magazine and journal of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, which contains a history of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent for over half a century. So he wrote in the April edition of this journal and this magazine that मैं इस सफ़र में ये बात भी सोचता रहा कि बंगाला में अहले हदीस जमात की इतनी कसरत कैसे और किस ज़रिए से हुई, तो मुझे बतलाया गया कि जनाब मौलाना इनायत अली और मौलाना विलायत अली साहिबान की ये बरकत है. That he said that I saw in Bengal in the year 1913 large number of Ahlul Hadith, towns and cities full only of the Ahlul Hadith in the unified region of Bengal, So I was amazed at this, and I questioned the people there that what is the reason and the secret for the Ahlul Hadith call to spread in these large numbers in Bengal. So he said, I was informed that this is from the efforts of Allama Wilayat Ali and Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri. Wilayat Ali and Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri. And other areas that fall today in Bangladesh, such as Jaisur, Faridpur, and Bagora, and Rajshahi that we have just mentioned, they were foremost centers of the call of these two brothers that contain several Ahlul Hadith, Salafi scholars, and those people who are attached to their call, their reformist, revivalist call in these cities. And Sheikh Ghulam Rasul Meher, in his book Sargishte Mujahideen, which is one of the foremost sources regarding this reformative revivalist movement in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, the movement of the Shahidain and those who came after them from the Sadiq Puri family, he says, shedding light on the methodology of Sadiq Puri brothers in spreading the Ahlul Hadith maslak in these regions. So he says, जिस मकाम पर पहुँचते अगर वहाँ मस्जिद मौजूद होती तो किसी मौजून शख्स को इमाम मुकर्रर कर देते, मस्जिद ना होती तो तामीर करा देते. ख़ास तौर पर काबिल ज़िक्र अमर यह है कि इमाम महज नमाज पढ़ाने और ज़रूरी दीनी किताबें सिखाने ही का ज़िम्मेदार ना होता, बल्कि अपने इलाके के तमाम झगड़ों का फ़ैसला भी वही करता. सैयद साहब के इरादतमंदों का पुख्ता अकीदा था कि अंग्रेज़ी अदालतों की तरफ रुजू करने में दिल तारीक हो जाते हैं और ईमान का नुकसान पहुंचता है. इस तरह मौलाना ने एक हद तक नज़्म नसक का मुतवाज़ी निज़ाम कायम कर दिया. That Allama Wilayat Ali, whenever his methodology in spreading this reformative and revivalist movement was that any city and town he would enter, if there was a masjid there, then he would appoint a person who was of some knowledge in that city to be the imam of that masjid, who had some knowledge to be the imam of that masjid. And if there was no masjid, then he would build a masjid. And the imam, then he would just not be given the responsibility of leading the salawat and teaching some introductory books to the Muslims of that town and that city. Rather, he was also appointed as the judge, the one who would rule in matters of differences and disputes amongst the Muslims of that town and of that locality. And this is because of the belief of the Sadiq Puri brothers that to return back to the courts of the British that had been established in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, then in it is great harm and evil for the Muslims, and it harms the belief and creed of the Muslims. So this is how the Muslims, they got attached to this call that they return back to the masajid that they had established upon the Ahle-Hadith maslak and the Ahle-Hadith madhab, and they returned back to the disputes, and they found the ruling with justice in these matters in these masajid and by these scholars. So they shunned the rule and the courtyards of the British Empire and returned back to the Ahlul-Hadith scholars. And this is how the Ahlul-Hadith maslak and manhaj is spread amongst the Muslims, the madhab of the middle path of justice amongst all of the calls, amongst all of the calls. And just like his sheikh and his example, Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed, Sayyid Ahmed Rai Barelvi rahimahullah, Allama Wilayat Ali Sadiq Puri also performed the journey of Hajj, also undertook the journey of Hajj. So he traveled with his entire family, with his entire relatives, women, children, to perform the Hajj. And he remained almost 2 months in Mecca and Medina. And then he traveled from Mecca and Medina, from Hijaz to Najd and to Asir, the southern areas of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia today, and even traveled to Yemen, benefiting from the scholars, the major scholars of Islam in those times in these regions. He traveled to Yemen and he sought knowledge from Shaykh al-Islam Imam Muhammad bin Ali al-Shawkani. He met and he sought knowledge from Imam Muhammad bin Ali al-Shawkani, and he read books of hadith, and he learned hadith and his sciences from him, and he attained the ijaza, the chain of narration, directly from Imam al-Shawkani. Imam al-Shawkani and Allama Wilayat Ali Sadiq Puri then brought this chain of narration back to the Indo-Pak subcontinent, brought this knowledge of hadith and his sciences and the madhab of the muhaddithin that he benefited from in Hijaz and in Najd and in Yemen. He brought it back to the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And during his preparations for jihad and battles in the year 1269 after the Hijrah, on the 22nd day of Muharram, Allama Wilayat Ali Sadiq Puri passed away in the region of Sathiana, which falls today in the border areas of Pakistan, northern Pakistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where he had went to take part in a battle in liberating the Muslims from oppressive forces, and he passed away in this place in the year 1852 or 1269 after the Hijrah. And his brother Allama Inayat Ali, he passed away 6 years after him. 6 years after him in the month of Shaban in the year 1274 after the Hijrah, corresponding to 1858. 1858. And Allama Wilayat Ali and Allama Inayat Ali Sadiq Puri, then they, as we mentioned, they were from the foremost companions and students and truthful aides of Sayyid Ahmed Shaheed and Shah Ismail Shaheed rahimahullah. And after their deaths, then their entire family, the Sadiq Puri family, the first and pure and the major Ahle-Hadith family in Bihar in India, they continued this revivalist, this reformative movement of both politically, of fighting against the colonial rule of the British Empire that had continued to increase, and liberating the Indo-Pak subcontinent from this colonial rule of oppression and granting freedom to the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and spreading by way of pen and tongue, spreading the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah upon the madhab and the manhaj of the Ahlul-Hadith, upon the madhab and the manhaj of the Ahlul-Hadith. And their contributions. This is just a brief overview. One can mention hours and hours and sittings upon sittings of their blessings upon the Muslims of the Indo-Pak subcontinent and their contributions to the history of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, to the point that Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi, from the major scholars of the Hanafis, Sayyid Abul Hasan Ali Mian Nadwi, he says in his book Jab Iman Ki Bahar Aayi, he says, Agar Jaan Nisari, Isar wa Qurbani aur Himmat wa Jawan Mardi ke wo sare कारनामे जो इस मुल्क के जिहाद हुर्रियत और कौमी आज़ादी की तारीख़ से मुताल्लिक़ हैं, एक पढ़ने में रखे जाएँ और अहले सादिकपुर ख़ानदान मौलाना विलायत अली अज़ीमाबादी के कारनामे और क़ुरबानियाँ एक पढ़ने में तो आखिर ज़िक्र का पढ़ना नुमायां तौर पर भारी होगा. He says that if all of the efforts of bravery and sacrifice in the Indo-Pak subcontinent to liberate it and free it from the colonial rule of the British Empire, if it was to be placed in one side of a scale, if it was to be placed in one side of a scale, and the efforts of the Sadikpur family, Allama Vilayat Ali Sadikpuri and Allama Inayat Ali Sadikpuri and their family members, if it was to be placed in another part of the scale, then the scale of the Sadikpuri efforts, then it would outweigh and outnumber the efforts of the entire Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent in liberating and reforming and reviving Islam in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. Then we come to with the progression of time, we come to the great war that occurred in the year 1857. The war of independence that occurred in the year 1857, and this was the last year of the life of Allama Inayat Ali Sadikpuri. Inayat Ali Sadikpuri, as we mentioned, the younger brother of Allama Vilayat Ali Sadikpuri, he passed away in the year 1858. 1858. He passed away in the year 1858. He passed away in the year 1858. So this great war for freedom of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, it occurred in the year 1857, and it occurred on the 10th day of May in the year 1857, when the East India Trading Company, it had reached its pinnacle in power and might and control of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, where not just the Muslims, all of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, irrespective of their creed and their beliefs, from the Hindus and other than them, they're all unified in rebelling and uprising and fighting the British, the British and the armies of the East India Trading Company, armies of the East India Trading Company, and rebelling and fighting and uprising against their oppression, of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, And this rebellion and movement and effort and war of 1857, that it has been labeled by the British in their sources, in the English sources one can find and other sources, they have labeled this to be ghadar, to be a rebellion and revolt that was based on treachery to the British Raj, to the British rule. And many of the people until today, when they mention this war of 1857, then they name it with this rebellion, and that it was a rise against, an uprising against, and it was treachery. It was a rebellion. But the truth of the matter is that this is the first armed battle against the British in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And the proof of that is that in the year 1857, then the major scholars of the Muslims in the city of Delhi, the seat of the Mughal dynasty that had now reached its last breaths, then they had granted a fatwa of jihad, a fatwa of fighting against the colonial power of the British, in order to free the Indo-Pak subcontinent from the oppressive rule, And from the scholars who had signed this fatwa, this edict, from the foremost of them is Shaykh al-Kul fil Kul, Mujaddid Sayyid Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, the Imam of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And Allama Sayyid Dawood Ghaznawi, rahimahullah, the grandson of Allama Abdullah Ghaznawi, from the foremost students of Shaykh al-Kul Sayyid Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, the son of Allama Abdul Jabbar Ghaznawi, also from the foremost students of Sayyid Shaykh al-Kul Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, Sayyid Dawood Ghaznawi, who was appointed as the first Amir, the first president of the Ahle-Hadith Society of Pakistan after its creation in the year 1947. He wrote a detailed article that he titled 1857 Ki Jang Azadi Ya Ghadar, that this war that occurred in 1857, was it a war for independence, for freedom, or was it a rebellion? Was it a revolt and rebellion? And this great article was published by Allama Ata'Allah Hanif Bhojiani, rahimahullah, in his well-known magazine, which is one of the foremost magazines of the Ahle-Hadith in Pakistan after its creation, that has continued until our times, walhamdulillah. Al-Ihtisam, published from Lahore, from his Institute of Dar al-Da'wah Salafiyya, and this volume was a special number on Tehreek Azadi number, a special volume for this war that occurred in 1857. So from the articles in this volume was this great article of Sayyid Dawood Ghaznawi. He mentioned some very important points in this article, some very important points in this article, and this was published, this volume, in the year 1957. So from that, which he says that इसमें कोई शक नहीं कि हिंदुस्तानी रियासतों ने इस अवामी तहरीक में अवाम का साथ नहीं दिया, बल्कि बाज़ रियासतों ने ठीक उस वक्त जबकि अंग्रेज़ के कदम उखड़ रहे थे अंग्रेज़ों की सरगर्म इमदाद की सुतलज और जमुना के दरमियान के सिख रियासतों, बिलखुसूस रियासत पटियाला ने, और इस तरह नेपाल के राना शमशेर जंग ने और दूसरे अरबाब इक़्तिदार ने सिर्फ अपने ज़ाती मफाद और अपने इक़्तिदार की हिफाजत के लिए मुल्क से गद्दारी की, लेकिन इससे इस तहरीक आज़ादी की उमूमियत पर कोई हर्फ नहीं आता. He mentions some very important points of history in this article. He says that without a doubt, then some of the powers and people in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, they did not take part in this war of independence of 1857. Rather, some of them are those who sided with the British, who betrayed the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent and decided with the British to keep their control, keep their worldly benefits, and keep their might and power in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. From them are the Sikhs who sided with the British in this war for independence, in which all of the people, regardless of creed, then they were unified against the British, this new colonial power who had oppressively taken control of the land of these people in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. So the Sikhs, he says, from the Sutlej river, and it is a well-known river from Punjab that flows, and it is the longest of the 5 rivers that flows through Punjab, and this is where Punjab takes its name. The region of Punjab, it takes its name, which literally means 5 rivers. Punjab, 5 rivers, and the longest of these rivers is the Sutlej river. So from the Sutlej river until Jamna, which also is a major river that flows through eastern India and into Bangladesh. Rather, it is one of the 3 major rivers of Bangladesh. So from these regions, from the west in Punjab to the east in Bangladesh, all of the Sikhs, then they were unified in betraying the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent and sided with the British. Sided with the British, especially the rulers of Patiala, which is a city today in the state of Punjab in India. It had a major Sikh rulership. They sided with the British. He says similar was Rana Shamsher Jung of Nepal, and he was the commander-in-chief of the army of Nepal in those times. He also betrayed the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and for his personal benefits and his personal reasons of might and power and wealth, he sided with the British. He sided with the British. He also says in this article that इस तहरीक आज़ादी में हज़ारों बल्कि लाखों इंसानों ने शिरकत की. वो बड़ी बहादुरी से अंग्रेज़ों के ख़िलाफ़ मारिका आरा हुए. इसके सिले में वो तोपों के सामने रख कर उड़ाए गए, फांसियों पर लटकाए गए, गोलियों का निशाना बनाए गए. इनके सामने इनकी बहू बेटियों की इज़्ज़त व नामूस पर हमला किया गया. इनके मासूम बच्चों इनके सामने भेड़ बकरियों की तरह ज़िबा किए गए. इन बहादुर सपूतों की लाशों के टुकड़े टुकड़े किए गए और फिर आग के शोलों की नज़र किए गए. इनकी दौलत से भरपूर मकानात और बाज़ार लूट लिए गए और पुर रौनक और आबाद शहरों को ताख्त और ताराज किया गया. इस कत्ले आम के बाद भी कोई तअम्मुल कर सकता है कि ये जंग आज़ादी ना थी या ये अवामी तहरीक ना थी. He says in this war of 1857, then not just hundreds of thousands, rather not just thousands, rather hundreds of thousands of people, residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, they took part in it. They showed great bravery against the British in it, and they were slaughtered and killed by the British. They were fired by way of killing, by way of firing squads. Their women were raped. Their children were killed and slaughtered in front of them, and they were cut. These residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent by the British army, they were cut into pieces and they were burned. They were burned, and their properties and wealth was looted. The properties and wealth was looted, and their flourishing towns and cities, then they were left in ruin. They were left in ruin. He says that even after this, who can claim that this was not a great war against the British, but rather it was just a rebellion and a revolt. Rather it was treachery and a rebellion and a revolt. Then he says regarding the Muslims who took part in this great war of 1857, regarding the scholars and the mujahideen who took part in this great war of freedom in 1847, he says, अंग्रेज़ मुसन्निफ़ीन बिलउमुम इस हकीकत का इजहार करते हैं कि 1857 के हंगामे के असल बानी मुसलमान ही थे. मुसलमानों में हुक्मरानी व पासबानी का शऊर बाकी था. वो इस मुल्क में कई सदियों की फरमान रवाई के भुला नहीं थे. इसके दिल व दिमाग पर अपने उरूज व इक़्तिदार के नक्श अभी बाकी थे. वो अपनी अजीम सल्तनत के मिट जाने के बावजूद अपने अंदर अंग्रेज़ से आखिरी टक्कर लेने के लिए मुतरब थे और वक्त का मुंतज़िर थे. That he says that even the British, then they gave testimony and they gave proof that in this war of 1857, then the foremost of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent that took part and they sacrificed themselves for were the Muslims. Were the Muslims in comparison to all of the other followers of the other religions and creeds in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And even the British, they considered this war to be a rebellion and treachery and revolt by the Muslims against them. By the Muslims against them. And the Muslims, they still had their might and power and their attachment to the might and power in the Indo-Pak subcontinent of the rulership of the Muslims, and they were waiting for the chance to return this might and power back to the Muslims and Islam. That they were still attached to the great history of centuries in the Indo-Pak subcontinent of might and power and they were waiting for their chance and opportunity to take back what had been taken from them. What have been taken from them? Allama Dawood Ghaznavi, he quotes from Metcalfe that he says, Musalman, translation of Urdu, Musalman अपनी जंगोजियाँ रिवायात का ख्याल करते हुए अपने गुज़िश्ता बादशाहों की अज़मत व जलाल का ख्वाब देख रहे थे और रोज़ाना अपनी सल्तनत की बहाली के लिए दुआ मांगा करते थे. That Metcalfe, and he is Charles Metcalfe, Charles Theophilus Metcalfe. He was known as Sir Charles Metcalfe, and he was first he started as being the director of the East India Trading Company, and then he started to rise in power until he became the Governor General of India, under the British Raj. That he was the de facto ruler and the head of India under the British Empire. He did not just rule India, but since we are in Canada, it's a part of history that he was the Governor General of India, he was the Governor General of Jamaica, and he was the Governor General of the province of Canada. He was the Governor General of the province of Canada under the British Empire. Under the British Empire, he passed away in the year 1846. And he was born in India, in Bengal, in Calcutta, in India, the capital of the British rule over the Indo-Pak subcontinent, where his father had went to fight with the army of the East India Trading Company. This is where this person Metcalfe was born, and this is where he got married, and this is where he passed away. So he says in this statement that this rebellion and revolt and tyranny and treachery was the result of the Muslims, who were still dreaming of their past might and power and dynasties and rulership in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and they hoped that that rule would return, and they were making dua for that rule, to that rule of might and power and nobility and virtue to return back to them. Then he also says, जो मुसलमान ज़्यादा मुतअस्सिब है वो तो खुल्लम खुल्ला बगावत में हिस्सा ले रहे हैं, बाकी तमाम भी अलानिया जिहाद की फ़र्जियत पर बहस में मसरूफ़ हैं. That those Muslims who are extreme fundamentalists, they are extremist fundamentalists, they are openly rebelling against the British rule, and even the remaining of them, then they are calling for jihad, fighting this oppressive colonial rule of the British. Sayyid Allama Muhammad Dawood Ghaznavi, he says, इससे मालूम होता है कि हज़रत सैयद अहमद शहीद ने 1857 से 40 साल पहले जो दावत जिहाद मुसलमानों को दी थी वो अपना काम कर रही थी. उलमाए कराम और हज़रात मुजाहिदीन के पेश नज़र कोई दुनियावी मफाद ना था, उनके सामने सिर्फ एक ही नस्ब आइन था और एक ही आग सबके सीनों में शोला जन थी कि अंग्रेज़ जालिम और गासिब हैं. ये एक ताजिर की हैसियत में हमारे मुल्क में आए और अब तमाम मुल्क पर अपनी मुस्तकिल सल्तनत ले पाँव जमा रहे हैं. इनकी हुकूमत पर मुतमईन और राज़ी हो जाना मुसलमानों के लिए बाइस नंग और नाकाबिल बर्दाश्त है. उलमा ने 1857 की तहरीक आज़ादी को जिहाद करार दिया और इसके लिए फतवा मुरतब किया. फिर तहरीक का नाम हो जाने के बाद फांसी, जला वतनी, उबूद दियार शुऊर और उम्र कैद की सज़ाएँ खंदाए पेशानी से भुगती. He says that this great war of 1857, it shows that foundation, the Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and his movement, the Tahreek Shaheedain, it laid the foundation of 40 years ago of fighting and rebelling against oppression and reforming and reviving the state of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent. Then it was still being continued, and it was still alive. It was still alive even 40 years after their martyrdom, after the martyrdom of the Shaheedain. And this the efforts of the scholars in this war of 1857 then it was not for any worldly benefit. It was not for any worldly benefit of reaching power and position and gaining wealth and status. Rather, it was only a fight against the oppression of this new colonial power that had colonized the Indo-Pak subcontinent and taken the due right away from his people. Taken the due right away from his people. And they said that these people, then they had come to our country as traders, the East India Trading Company, until they overtook our lands. And they expelled us from our lands, from our localities, and from our matters of affairs of life in their lands. And now they had made us their slaves and had oppressed us. And this is why the scholars in 1857, they gave fatwa, the edict of jihad, fighting against this oppressive rule of the British. And after that, then they bore with great bravery and patience all types of punishment by the British, as will come soon inshallah, from hanging to death and from being expelled from the lands to faraway islands where many of them passed away, and to walk the planks, to fall to the death into the oceans, and to live their lives in imprisonment, and other types of atrocities that the British they did against the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, especially the Muslims and their scholars, and their scholars. And then, after mentioning that this war of 1857, then all of the people took part in it, all of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, irrespective of the creed and the belief from the Hindus and other than it. Then we mentioned the role of the Muslims in this war, and that it was foremost the Muslims who took part in this war. Now we will come to the role of the Ahle-Hadith, the Salafis in this war. So this war had several of its major participants who played a great important role in this war. Several of them were from the Ahle-Hadith. Several of the scholars of the Ahle-Hadith and several of the Mujahideen from the freedom fighters, they are the ones who took part in this war. Sheikh Ghulam Rasul Mahar, in his book 1857, in his book that is titled 1857, which is one of the most important books that has been written in this important part of history of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, he says, Amir Maulana Inayat Ali Sadiqpuri bhi इस तहरीक के साथ थे, बल्कि अंग्रेज़ों का ख्याल है कि मर्दान में रेजिमेंट नंबर 55 की बगावत मौलाना इनायत अली ही की कोशिशों का नतीजा थी, और ख़ुद इन्होंने नारंजी में महाज कायम करके जंग शुरू कर दी थी. That he says that the great scholar of the Ahlul-Hadith, Allama Inayat Ali Sadiqpuri, who has preceded, then he was heavily involved and submerged in this war of 1857. As we said, it occurred in the last year of his life, in which he passed away in the year 1858. And he says that rather the British themselves, they have mentioned that the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent who were under their army, which was the regiment number 55, a part of the army, then he was the one who he instigated them to fight against the British in the city of Mardan, which today falls in the border areas of Pakistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and also in Naranji, also another border town. Then in this city, in this town, then Allama Inayat Ali Sadiqpuri had made his base to collect the Mujahideen and the fighters to fight in this war of independence of the Indo-Pak subcontinent against the British. And from the major names that are mentioned in this war who sacrificed and who had great efforts of bravery and courage and efforts in this war are Allama Ahmadullah Shah Madrasi and Liaqat Ali Ilhabadi and Abdul Jalil Ali Garhi and Ali Karim Patnawi. All of them were from the Ahlul-Hadith. All of them were from the Ahlul-Hadith who have great efforts in this war of 1857. 1857. And sadly, then this war, it was crushed by the East India Trading Company and its armies due to tyranny of some of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent themselves, who due to position and money and bribery and status and promises from the British, they sided with the British, and they resulted in the defeat of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent in this war, after which in the year 1858, the British Empire, it appointed its direct rule over the Indo-Pak subcontinent. That India now became a part of the British Empire, a colony of the British Empire, that they ruled by their title British Raj. The British Raj, and they appointed their Governor General over the Indo-Pak subcontinent, who directly reported to the Queen and the King of Britain, and this continued until 1947. From 1858 until the freedom of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, is liberation from this colonial rule in 1947. From the other major historical events that occurred politically in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, the efforts of the Ahle-Hadith in these events and in these movements of freeing and fighting for the freedom of the Indo-Pak subcontinent against the British colonial rule, is the Battle of Ambala. Battle of Ambala in the year 1863. And this Ambala, then it is a city in Haryana, in the state of Haryana in India, to the west of the capital of Delhi. It is located on the border of the state of Punjab in India. And the son of Allama Vilayat Ali Sadiq Puri, Allama Abdullah Sadiq Puri, he became the ruler and the guide of this movement, this reformative and revivalist movement of Tahrik Shahidain and Jamaat Mujahideen after the death of his father. Ghulam Rasul Mohar, he says in his book Sargisht Mujahideen, मौलाना का अहद इमारत तकरीबन 40 साल पर फैला हुआ है और जमात मुजाहिदीन की सरगिश्त का ये निहायत शानदार बाब है. That his rulership over this movement, then it was for a period of 40 years. It was for a period of 40 years, and it was that period in which this movement, this reformative revivalist movement, it reached its peak. It reached its peak, and it achieved great achievements in both the political sphere against their fight for freedom against the British Empire, and in terms of spreading the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and eradicating shirk and bid'ah and Hindu rituals and practices amongst the Muslims. And in the lifetime of Allama Abdullah Sadiq Puri, then this war of Ambala took place. And in this war, the British, then they were dealt a severe loss. The British Empire, it was dealt a severe loss, and they were humiliated in this war, and they lost several of the soldiers, and they lost a great deal of weaponry and a great deal of wealth in this war. And they tried their best to save their honor, reputation in this war. So they emptied all of the Sikhs that were aligned with them from Punjab and brought them all over to Ambala to take part in this war. And the British, then their means of rulership was to bribe the people into submission. So they bribed the Sikhs in large numbers, and they bought their support. They bought the support, and they brought them to Ambala to fight the Muslims in this war, and the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent in this war, until when the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent and the Muslims, they were defeated by these major forces that have come with bribery to fight them, and then the British, they severely tortured those who were arrested from the Muslims in this war, and they burned their properties and their cities and left no one behind from their families except that they slaughtered them. This war, it resulted in the British realizing that this movement of the Shaheedain, Tahreek Shaheedain, and this Jamaatul Mujahideen, this movement of freedom fighters against the British, now that it is a major power. It is a major power that needs to be squashed and that needs to be dealt with. They had underestimated it until this time. But with this war of Ambela in the year 1863, they realized that this is a major strength and might and power in internal India, in internal Indo-Pak subcontinent, that needs to be squashed and that needs to be quelled. So they turn to that which is known as judicial cases and accusations against the Muslims, and especially against the Ahle-Hadith scholars, those who were part of this movement. And they utilized the term Wahhabi as an accusation of tyranny and treachery against the Ahlul Hadith. And several cases were lodged against the Ahlul Hadith from the foremost scholars of the Ahlul Hadith in various cities in which they were rounded up and collected, and then they were put in torture cells for the remaining of their lives, where many of them passed away in this torture, in this state of torture. Many of them were sent to the faraway islands to be tortured, and where they passed away under this torture by the British Empire in their efforts to quell this movement of the Ahlul Hadith, this great movement for the fighting for the freedom of the Indo-Pak subcontinent from the oppressive rule of the British Empire, And we'll just mention five of these cases that were lodged against the Ahlul Hadith and the major scholars of the Ahlul Hadith. For the first of them is the case of Ambala. The case of Ambala in the same city, in the state of Haryana in India. It was lodged in the year 1280 after the Hijrah, corresponding to 1864. 1864, immediately after this war of Ambala in the year 1863. And in this case, then 11 from the major scholars and the richest, wealthiest people from amongst the Ahlul Hadith, they were accused of being Wahhabi and of siding with were accused of rebellion and tyranny against the British rule. And from them is Allama Yahya Ali Ja'fari Sadiqpuri and Abdul Rahim Sadiqpuri and Muhammad Jafar Thanisari and Abdul Ghaffar from Patna and Qadi Mian Jan who was from Bengal. The first of them, Yahya Ali Ja'fari Sadiqpuri, then he was sent to Kalapani. And Kalapani, then this was the name of the jail that the British had established in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands that are union area of India today. They are a union area of India today, and they were used by the colonial government of the British Empire for the purpose of exiling criminals and political prisoners to this jail. And it is a jail that one had to travel by ship and boat. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands, then they are union territory of India, and there are almost 836 islands. 836 islands, and only 31 of them are inhabited today. Only 31 are inhabited, and they lie in the southeast of mainland India. Southeast of mainland India, in the Bay of Bengal. Near Indonesia. It is located almost 1200 kilometers to the east of Chennai, the city of Madras, and 1250 kilometers to the south of Calcutta, So Allama Yahya Ali Ja'fari Sadiqpuri was sent to this jail where he passed away while in prison in Kalapani. And the last of them, who is Qazi Mian Jan, then he passed away in the Ambala jail itself. In the Ambala jail itself. The remaining 3, then they remained in prison for 18 years. They remained in prison by the British for 18 years. The second of these cases is the case of Patna. Case of Patna that occurred in the year 1865. 1865, a year late after the case of Ambala. And this was against Allama Ahmadullah Sadiq Puri. Allama Ahmadullah Sadiq Puri, and he was from the richest of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent in those times, in the region of Patna in Sadikpur, and his millions of property, then it was taken from him. And his rare library of books, old books and manuscripts, then it was destroyed and burned by the British Empire, and false testimonials were brought against him that he is from the traders who is from the Wahhabis, who are traders of the British Empire, and he was also sent to Kalapani, where he passed away in jail, this jail, this cellular jail in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The third of these cases is the case of Malda in the year 1870. Malda in the year 1870, and this case, then Malda, then it is a place, a region, a city in West Bengal, India, in the province of West Bengal, India. In this case, it was against the well-known freedom fighter of the Ahle-Hadith, Amiruddin from West Bengal, and he was also from the rich people of the Ahle-Hadith who supported the fight for freedom against the British Raj. All of his properties were taken away from him, and he was also sent to Kalapani. And after 10 years of bearing torture in the cellular jail in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, then he was released, where he returned back to mainland India. The fourth case was the case of Raj Mahal, also in the year 1870. And Raj Mahal, then it is a city in the Indian state today of Jharkhand, which was part of Bengal, and this was a case against Ibrahim Mandal, who was one of the foremost of the people who supported the movement of freedom and liberation from the Ahle-Hadith against the British Empire. All of his properties and millions of wealth, then it was seized by the British, and he was also imprisoned until the year 1878 for a period of 8 years. The fifth and final case that we'll mention is also the case of Patna in the year 1871, which was a very important case. It is one of the most important cases in the history of the Ahle-Hadith and their political efforts against the British Empire. And in this case, then Sheikh Mubarak Ali and his son Tabarak Ali and Amir Khan and Deen Muhammad and Aminuddin, they were accused of being Wahhabis, of supporting rebellion and being tyrants of the British Empire. And from the most important of these names is Sheikh Mubarak Ali, who after the arrest of Ahmadullah, who was preceded, then he was the head of the movement of freedom and liberation against the British of the Ahle-Hadith. He was arrested in the year 1868, and in the year 1871, in this case of Patna, then he was accused of being a Wahhabi, a traitor of the British Empire, and he was placed under arrest, and he was severely tortured, where he passed away under arrest, in jail under arrest. And his son Tabarak Ali, then he was accused of taking part in the Ambala war that occurred, that we preceded, and Haji Deen Muhammad and Aminuddin, they were accused of supporting the Mujahideen and the freedom fighters in this war. They were accused of being from those who supported the freedom fighters in this war. And from the most important of them is Amir Khan. Amir Khan, then he was from the millionaires of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, from the well-known traders of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent who resided in Patna, in the capital of present-day Bihar, the state of Bihar. He was from someone who possessed millions, and he was one of the major traders of leather in Bengal and Bihar, and he was someone who even the British, then they could not challenge him in his trading and in his wealth. And he was from the students of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and Allama Vilayat Ali Sadiq Puri, from the students of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and Vilayat Ali Sadiq Puri. And he was arrested and accused of being a traitor and a Wahhabi when he was 75 years of age. In this case of Patna in 1871. And his entire business and wealth, then it was destroyed by the British, and it was seized by the British. And 113 bribed people were brought by the British as testimonies against him of him being a traitor against the British and being a Wahhabi. And he was also ruled by the British to be sent to Kalapani, to the cellular jail in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. But due to his old age of being 75 years, then he was put under arrest in mainland India itself. And he was released in the year 1879, almost 8 years later, and the British did not give back a single cent and dollar from his wealth, the millions and millions that they had unjustly seized from his wealth. So these are 5 of the major cases that were lodged against the Ahle-Hadith and the people of this movement of Tahriq Shahidain and Jamaat Mujahideen, those who had foremost efforts in fighting against the oppression of the colonial power of the British Empire, and had foremost efforts in liberating and fighting for the freedom of the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And these cases, they continued even after this until 1947. And the foremost of the people who were accused and arrested and tortured and killed in these cases, and their wealth seized, and all types of tyranny committed against them, then the foremost of them were the Ahlul-Hadith. And we'll end our session here, and inshallah begin in our next class with some of the religious efforts. We have just finished the political efforts of the Ahlul-Hadith in that important point of history in fighting against the British Empire and its oppressive rule, and their efforts in liberating the Indo-Pak subcontinent from this rule and fighting for its freedom. And inshallah in our next class we'll begin with the religious efforts of the Ahlul-Hadith in establishing the foremost learning of institutes, the institutes of learning in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, from the foremost universities and madaris and institutes of learning that are an example for all Muslims of the Indo-Pak subcontinent. That these are the first institutes that implemented a new syllabus, a new system of learning, new facilities for the students, that all of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, in their hundreds and thousands and maybe millions of madaris and religious institutes, they follow until this day. And sadly, many of these people, then they do not give the credit to the Ahlul-Hadith, in their reviving of the system of teaching and learning and education in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And the Hanafis, the Ahlul Rai, they have hijacked this matter and claim that Nadwatul Ulama Lucknow, it is the first of the institutes that revived the methodology of teaching and learning in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, but we establish that the Ahlul Hadith far preceded them in this. And we'll also mention testimonies from the Hanafis themselves that give proof of this, that give proof of this. If there are any questions, then we can address them.
So like today in the political environment that we have in India, a lot of people, even Ahle-Hadith, they are saying that this jihad that the Ahle-Hadith scholars did, it was not for religious sake, it was for the love of the country. So, and they want to prove that we love this country. So what's the answer, sir? Was this for the country or for the religion?
I mean, these were movements, as we said, that all of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, they took part in. All of the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, from the Hindus and other than them, they were all part of this movement. They were all part of this movement. But of course, the Muslims, the Ahle-Hadith, then their goal was to spread the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah to the people and liberate and free the residents of the Indo-Pak subcontinent from this oppressive rule of this new foreign power, the colonial rule of the British Empire, So this movement that included both fighting against the British and spreading the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. Spreading the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. So it was a reformative and a revivalist movement of returning the Muslims back to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and calling the non-Muslims to the religion of Islam upon the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, or teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. As far as love for one's land or birth, then this is something that is a natural love that all people have, that one is born with, that he naturally is inclined to love his land, where he is born, where he is raised, where he has ties attached. This is something that is natural, as long as it remains in the limits of the Sharia and it does not transgress against the rules and boundaries and guidelines of the Sharia, then there's no harm in this. This is a natural love that one has, for example, for one's parents, one's wife, even though they're from the non-Muslims. One might accept Islam, but his parents are from the non-Muslims, but there's a natural love that he has for them, an affection he has for them. And even if his wife, for example, then she is from the Ahlul Kitab that Allah Ta'ala has permitted for a Muslim man to marry, then he has natural love for her. He does not love her for her religion. He does not love his parents for their religion of disbelief. Rather, this is natural love. So from it is love for one's place of birth or their homeland. So this is a natural love as long as it remains in the boundaries of the Sharia and Islamic guidelines. No. And if there are no questions, then we'll end the session here. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira.
وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون